Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Terrace Podcast. I am your host Craig Fowler, and on this occasion to look back over the 6 Premiership matches across the weekend, it is Craig Anderson. Craig, how's it going?
It's all good. I was in Australia for 3 weeks, so I am adapting back to Scottish weather. Fortunately, it's not been like sub-zero or anything, but I have felt it particularly cold.
So how was your trip? What did you do? Where did you see? Where did you go?
I was kind of partly a work trip as well. So I was in Adelaide. There was a conference in Adelaide, so I was there for a week, and then up to Brisbane for like a week and a half. I lived in Sydney, so we were hoping to get back there, but just with a wee one, we didn't want to take too many flights. So yeah, just did a lot of kind of tourism, going to see stuff because we lived there, but our daughter hadn't been before, so we're going to see kangaroos and koalas and all the rest of it, and generally just enjoying sunshine and good food and stuff like that, and then remembering essentially like how much better a lot of things are, which is it's never good when you're then kind of stoating straight back into Glasgow. It's just like the weather, the attitude of people is just a like much more chilled out country. It's probably more suited to my very, very laid back approach, but nonetheless, at least I'm back for some festive football, which is the main thing.
Yes, quite. And we'll get to that right now. Let's begin with the game that had I think we're just going to do most goals. Yeah, actually, let's just do that in descending order from the most goals per match. So we'll start with Hibs winning 3-1 at Aberdeen. Craig, I watched this back up until Hibs went 3-1 ahead. So I've got some thoughts on how this managed to transpire. But before I do, as my guest on the show, what were your kind of immediate thoughts, whether you watched it or whether you watched Sportscene or just upon seeing the scoreline and seeing the fact that Aberdeen have now failed to win in 6 consecutive Scottish Premiership games, and Hibs having at one point looked like David Gray was at the point of no return in terms of the pressure that he was under as Hibs manager, have started to make a quite a decent recovery.
To be honest, like even though I think on the terrace predictions I picked Aberdeen for this game, it wasn't a massive surprise. I think we all said at the start of the season that Aberdeen were probably riding the luck a little bit as much as it was an impressive run of results. Like, I don't think it is unfair to say that winning every single game is unsustainable. No team does that. Celtic don't do that. So it wasn't that much of a surprise that they've kind of reverted back to not winning every single week. And I think Hibs have a little bit about them. Like they're a bit of a mess as well, in that there's kind of still, even in this game, there's like little precursors to shambles that you can kind of see. It's not like a perfect polished performance. They've won 2 games in a row, but both times they've kind of been trailing and they've had to kind of fight their way back in. But at the same time, you can see a wee bit of balance to the team now. You can see, I don't want to say solidity in terms of the actual individual performances, but the shape is now set up, I think, to be probably a bit more pragmatic in terms of just having a bit of cover for the defence, having probably one less attacking player in than they maybe had at times. So I think very impressive for Hibs. It's always an impressive result to go and win at Pittodrie, I think, like, no matter how good Aberdeen are, and especially this season, because they've not obviously lost too many games there. But yeah, whether it sparks, whether to me it could be a false dawn for Hibs in terms of them being like, especially given their next fixture and how that tends to go, it'd be a false dawn to say they're suddenly flying up the table. But I think it is probably, sadly for all of us, kind of just a wee reminder that they're probably not going to get relegated, which is what we were hoping for in terms of like comedy capers at the bottom. But unfortunately, the 2 Edinburgh teams have disappointed this weekend in that respect.
Yeah, we'll get onto the other one soon enough. But for this one, what really stood out was the not the system that Gray went with, because he has recently, as you said, kind of adapted things, gone with the three at the back, try to give the defence a bit more protection. It's really kind of unleashed Nicky Cadden as a attacking force on the left, and it's led to, in general, a bit more fluidity up top. I think with Eli Johan being one of the forwards, and he likes to either drop or likes to kind of spin out into the channels, and quite often in other games his space has been taken by Junior Hoylett, another kind of like somebody who's got a lot of experience and therefore a lot of intelligence and knows where to pick up these areas whenever Johan goes. And Dwight Gale was kind of a similar player. So it was interesting that it went with a team without Gale, without Hoylett, Johan still up top, but partnered alongside Martin Boyle. So you've got these two speed guys who are generally in their Hibs career have been regarded as wingers rather than forwards, but both of them could obviously play there. But then in behind them, they had Josh Campbell. Now, you're thinking off the bat, you're like, well, I'm not sure how much sense that makes, because if you're playing with two guys who are very good, or who are very quick, and therefore should be good at running in behind, then surely you want to play somebody more in the mould of he's not at the club anymore, but more in the mould of like a Scott Allen, like somebody who is known for threading through perfectly weighted through balls, somebody with a bit of creativity. Josh Campbell is not that. He has his uses, and I think the Hibs support have been a little bit harsh on him at times this season. I've seen some Hibs fans say he's like the worst player they've ever had and stuff, which is obviously ridiculous. But he is not the kind of, as a number 10, as an attacking midfielder, he's not that kind of sexy, kind of technically proficient kind of player. But it all worked very well. And it worked well because Campbell was the kind of chaos factor. Like, we know about Campbell is that he will work his backside off. He's happy to throw his weight around. He gives everything he can when he's on the football field. That's why he's playing at this level. And they just kind of went long to him quite a lot. They went direct, but they went direct to Campbell. And I saw Jimmy Tillene's comments after the game basically saying that the players need to be cool in the concept, and that when another team scores, because obviously Aberdeen took the lead in this one. Sorry, I usually announce these at the top, but I'm very tired this week. But Aberdeen took the lead through Toby Keskinen, and then Hibs equalised. And then obviously Hibs go to win the game 3-1. Thielen's talking like the players need to adapt to suffering a setback, for instance. And I think that's what he's talking about. I think he should be looking at himself in the mirror a bit more, because what kind of stood out to me with this was Hibs going long to kind of Campbell, long to the three forwards, and the Aberdeen midfield just kind of allowing them to, because Campbell was pushed up very high. You could almost call it a 3-4-3. Campbell was like, you see it for the equaliser. Now, there's obviously a couple of big mistakes in there, but I have a bit of sympathy with Malloy, because this happened quite a lot, where the job to pick up Campbell wasn't that of Nielsen or wasn't that of Shinnie, and this must be by design. It was left to the defence. But with Campbell basically being an R4, it sometimes left Aberdeen either 3 against 4, or even in the instance of this goal, 3-on-3 at the back, because I think it's McKenzie has dragged it wide quite a bit, because Hibs at the same time are also pushing their wing backs up high. So it got into a situation where Malloy tries to win the header against Campbell, fails to do so, then immediately they're in a wee bit of trouble. It could be swept up by Rubicic. He makes a massive mistake. It's the real shocker from him. There's just no excuses for that. He goes to clear the ball. There's nothing stopping him from doing so. He just swipes and misses it.
He should have just thought it was like a centre forward's knee, because then he would have absolutely made perfect contact on it. But
yeah, he would have. Yeah, he would have. That's exactly what he should have thought. But they're in. But this was something that Hibs done quite a lot, and that they just kind of done this kind of up and under, like bypass the midfield. Not necessarily try to play it through Nielsen or Shinnie, and just go over the top of them and drop it into that area where Boyle, Johan, and Campbell, if they can pick it up, have got the quality to exploit a kind of what is essentially a one-on-one matchup, because Aberdeen are committing so many numbers forward. And yeah, Thielen's got a point in a sense, because Aberdeen weren't as... Yeah, after they were quite dominant up until the first Hibs goal, and they lost a little bit of attacking verve after that, but you are still going up against a team that, yes, you may be third in the league, and they may be, I think they were, 8th going into the game. So you've obviously got to fancy yourselves, you're going to be attacking, you're going to throw caution to the wind. but you also have to kind of realise that Hibs are in a little bit of a false position based on the talent they have, especially going forward in the team. Like Hibs would be easily a top 6 side, probably like 4th, if it wasn't for the amount of defensive howlers that they've had this season. So you can't give them too much leeway on the other end of the park, because they are going to punish you, and that's what they did. And a big reason for that as well was that Martin Boyle, this was vintage Martin Boyle. He's not really had many of those games this season, but he was excellent everywhere, going long, coming deep, running the channels, creating 2 goals and scoring another.
Yeah, and I think you know you can do that, and I think probably what you're going to get from Martin Boyle from now on is those performances that he used to maybe give you 3 weeks out of 4, you maybe get them like 1 week out of 4 now, and that's where he has to be managed. But I thought it was the right game to bring him kind of back in from the start. I thought that as you said, with this setup, I do think that's how you beat this Aberdeen team, is you just miss out. Their midfield want to battle and they want to win balls, and they want to intercept. That's what they've got the 2 that sit deep. Like, that's what they want to do. Just don't give them the chance to do that. Just miss them out of the game. Neither of them had a particularly good game either in terms of when they did have to do things. So that's kind of what you want to get as much of. And yeah, I think for Aberdeen, it's like they've got that start to fall back on. So it's kind of like, of course, at some point in the season, you're going to get a run like this. It would be, I think you would have been naive, and maybe some of the supporters were, but naive to think that you weren't going to have a setback at some point. But the good thing for them, the context is they've got the points on the board. It's probably enough points that they will get that like top 6 finish that they probably were after at the start of the season in terms of where they started. So even if it falls away a bit, they've done the hard work at the start of the season, and they're not going to kind of be where they were last year. And yeah, maybe they can still kind of turn it back round and go on another daft winning streak. I don't think they will. I think what you will see now is probably back to kind of a win every couple of weeks and sometimes lose, and like most Premiership teams do, because I think that's what they are. I think they are a standard Premiership team who are probably slightly better than average, but they just kind of managed to put together that run with a head of steam, and that's probably, it obviously is really good for the manager in terms of buying him time, because I think we're seeing the flaws, but it's also good in terms of, yeah, most teams don't do that right at the start of the season. Usually what you see is a team putting a run like that together in the middle of the season or towards the end of the season, and that's what kind of forces them into Europe or whatever. They've just kind of got the points on the board early, and now it takes even if they do keep failing to win, it takes other teams a long time to catch up. Like you're talking about Hibs that they're playing. Hibs are still an absolute country mile behind them. It was still going to take, like, both teams have to replicate their form from the last few weeks right until the end of the season. If Hibs want to catch Aberdeen, it's like that's what they've bought themselves, and I think they need to have a bit of perspective on that as well. Obviously, losing at home, you don't want to do it, but you can afford these results, especially when you see, like, yeah, you can talk about a lot of teams are missing players at the moment, but they're missing potentially the best goalkeeper in the league, and they've got Ross Doohan there, who, while not, it's not like there's a direct howler for any of the goals. It's just like you don't really make very many saves, and I think we see that a lot with him. It's like just a lot of goals go in, and you're kind of like, I think a better goalkeeper would have saved that, rather than like shots going straight through him or anything. It's just like you are probably a championship goalkeeper playing in the Premiership. So I think Aberdeen can write these off. I don't think they need to be too worried about it. And I think for Hibs, it's like cautious optimism. If they can get the derby, if they can replicate what they've done the last couple of weeks in a game where they typically fall apart, then that's when they can hopefully start looking at top 6 and looking upwards. And say top 6, like any team in the league can still finish 4th. Like, and Hibs are very much in that.
For Hibs, it's just a case of it's the four players at the back, the goalie, the 3 centre halves, and you could probably say Nectar Triantis as well. Like, these guys who have got the capability to have good games, they just really lack any sort of consistency, and that's true of every single one of them. They all had decent games at Aberdeen, think Bashiri in particular, and that really kind of highlighted a weakness of Aberdeen, kind of compared to Hibs in this one. Thought at the beginning of the game, McGrath, Clarkson, Keskinen, I thought they were all great. Like Clarkson and Keskinen are real dynamic, moving about the final third. McGrath was cutting in off the right-hand side and doing his usual kind of those terrific reverse passes through balls to get Aberdeen kind of up the park. Keskinen was really direct in how he attacked him. You saw that with the goal, you saw that with the shot that he had. He also, I think he was something like second or third for expected assists out of the Premiership across the weekend. So even in conjunction to being a great goal threat, he was also very creative as well. But Esther Sokler, man, he's just he's got one thing. It seems like a couple of Aberdeen forwards, him and Peter Ambrose, but Esther Sokler has actually got a bit of ability that when he does get those chances, he can do them. Ambrose just doesn't really have it for me. But Sokler, in a game like this, when Bashiri just had a match for pace and for strength, Sokler, he just doesn't have the touch. He can't hold it up. And if you take away that threat and behind that he has, he doesn't really have an awful lot.
Yeah, and I mean, but that's been there's a reason, and okay, they had Miovski last season, and so he was kind of not getting loads of opportunities, but his goal scoring record last season was terrible. His goal scoring record this season, he scored slightly more, but he is not a player you can hang your hat on, and that's been what it's kind of been all about. They kept getting goals out of weird sources, and Nicky Devlin was scoring big goals, and it's you can't just keep having goals coming from everywhere if your strikers aren't consistent. And the one guy who you would hope could be a consistent goal scorer at this level that they've got in Nisbet hasn't. To me, he's not looking after himself very well. That's the vibe I get, that he's kind of going down the wrong path in his career at the moment, which was the path that he looked like he was starting off down when he left Partick Thistle. And maybe I'm wrong, but I just get that kind of vibe. And he's the one that should be starting every week for Aberdeen and probably doing the business. And instead, they're having to fling it to Sokler, to Ambrose. And as you said, these guys are your third option as a striker. They shouldn't be the guys you're trying to hang your hat on to score some goals, because to me, it's not going to happen. Sokler, I think what happens often is you look at his numbers and you're like, oh, he's got 7 goals this season. And then you're like, yes, but 4 of them were against Queen of the South and Dumbarton. and do you know what I mean? And where are they in League One at the moment? It's, in fact, sorry, I'm just looking at another one's against Spartans as well. So you've got two league goals. Ambrose, I think, has got one. I think Ambrose scored that winner against Dundee United, but he's not scored again. That you can't just keep. Oh no, sorry, Ambrose scored against Dumbarton as well. I do have a major disservice here, but you know what I mean. That's fine. These two guys are probably just meant to be that. But if your main guy, which I think is supposed to be Nisbet, isn't doing it, that's where you get a problem. And yeah, maybe your McGraths and your Clarksons and Duke and the rest can step up, but you're asking a lot of them, and that pressure eventually maybe tails off. I think Keskinen is the one, he looks a player. I really like him. I wasn't sure when they brought him in terms of the money they were paying for a guy from that level of football, even though it's coming from HJK or a good team in that level. Lee Irwin starts for them every week, so do you know what I mean? They've got pedigree. They're not a bad team, but that doesn't automatically mean that someone coming out of there is going to be good enough. But I think he's a live wire, and we saw the finish again. He does a lot of different types of stuff. So I think they've got enough in an attacking sense, but I think they really in January either have to kind of bite the bullet on Nisbet and just cut him loose and sign someone else, or they need to kind of sort out one of the other two and just get rid of either Ambrose or Sokler and bring in someone who can be a reliable starter.
Right, let's move on to our second game, and as I teased already earlier on, that is the game at Tynecastle as Hearts lifted themselves off the bottom of the Scottish Premiership on Sunday, defeating St Johnstone by 2-1. James Penrice opened the score on his first goal for Hearts in the first half, a quite dominant first half performance from Hearts, but they only got the one goal, and it really looked like it was going to be a real case of deja vu for Hearts this season when St Johnstone equalised in the second half. James Penrice, for the third game in succession, giving away a penalty and Graham Carey slotted it away. But I did wonder, and I'd messaged this in the group chat about 2 minutes before the next goal came, that I was thinking at halftime, this is either going to end up 3 or 4-0 Hearts or 2-1 St Johnstone, and I was really fearing it was going to be the latter when Carey scored. However, Blair Spittle popped up not long later, an excellent finish, a volley from outside the penalty area, and Hearts managed to win 2-1. A scoreline which I don't think necessarily reflected how the game went. But Craig, first of all, we'll go to you and what your takeaway was this from this game.
Simo Valakari, like, we'll talk about Hearts in it, but what's he up to? Like, I can understand, like, and I think everyone said it, the squad that he took on board is clearly very imbalanced, is clearly not very good. You saw Ray again, probably 2 goals that another goalkeeper might save. Maybe that's been a wee bit unfair on Penrice's goal, but definitely the Spittle one is through him. And okay, he makes a decent save at the end, but again, that's when you're 2-1 down because of you. And it's interesting because Ray was obviously talked up a lot in the Championship, and I thought it was probably going to be quite a good signing. But I think there's been a few like that where it's just not worked out, and there have been a few where you're like, right from the moment St Johnstone signed them, Sanders and McPake, Sanders has probably actually been one of their more decent performers, but you're just like, and Lewis Nielsen as well, you're like, you're just not a Premiership player. Why are you signing all of these guys? And I think we've kind of seen that, but nonetheless, like, Valakari has to surely have a little bit of pragmatism and understand that yes, you're playing with not the ideal hand, but like, just chucking all your attackers on the pitch. And I know Ewan said this last week already, but you're going to get to the point where you're going to be quite cut adrift before you get the chance to do some business in the squad. And I would add, obviously, as well, they have been able to bring in 2 players since he took over. So it's not that they haven't. Like, they did bring in Barry Douglas. They did bring in Bozo Mikulic.
Yeah, Bozo, to be fair, Bozo has looked a good signing so far. And Barry Douglas, I think he was like proper like emergency signing because they literally didn't have another left back. I don't know if was Douglas on the bench for this one? Is Douglas injured at the moment?
I haven't seen his name in quite a while, so I assumed they had got injured because, yes, Raymond is probably fine, but again, he seems to go off quite a lot as he did in this game.
Yeah, he does. His fitness doesn't seem to be quite up to scratch, but Douglas just kind of seemed like a signing that they almost just needed to make because they didn't have another left back. They started the season with only one left back. But
that's what I'm saying is that it's not like he's had a wee bit of chance to do some business, and yeah, I appreciate that's not ideal in October or whenever it is. But you're going to Tynecastle, and okay, Hearts are there to be got at the moment. But to me, there's 2 problems with the approach of just picking all your strikers at once, which is, first of all, it leaves your team quite imbalanced, and I think you saw that they were a bit of a mess at times. But also, it means that when you go to the bench to try and change a game, what have you got to bring on? Like, so you've not got just have one of the 3 sitting there as a sub, give the other team something to worry about. You can bring them on when you're chasing a game. Instead, you're like looking at the bench, and it's like regens, it's like youth players and guys who are clearly nowhere near good enough. And I don't really understand what he's trying to do with that. If it is just like a PR thing, if it's just like he's trying to be like, here I am, so look how attacking I am.
No, well, I said last week, I kind of get it because I think it's a case that they just don't really have any creative players in the squad at all. Like, naturally creative. The most naturally creative player they have is Graham Carey. Graham Carey is now at this age too old to run for a winger, and he's never been defensively good enough, so he can't really play in the centre of the park. So you're limited in how much you can use him. He came on at half time in this one and was decent enough in the second half, but he's not really a 90-minute player. So in order to get your team, and he wants to play his team attacking, and yeah, you could be right. You could be, maybe you set yourself up more defensive to begin with. I know that it kind of reminds me of Daniel Stendhal when he came at Hearts and he said after the season was finished, he did kind of think that he tries to change too much too quickly. And maybe it is a case with Valakari doing the same in that he should maybe wait to January to introduce more attacking players. But then there is another argument to that saying, well, if you're going to get them to play this way anyway, get them to do it now. And then once you could address the lack of balance in the squad, then these guys will at least have had the reps and playing your system. You add in the pieces that are needed, and then you can actually start to fly. But I think he plays the forwards because it's a way for them to get goals in a manner that they would otherwise struggle because nobody's really going to create. So they don't obviously create enough, but just by getting in the ball in the final third and having three guys who can stick the ball in the back of the net, although CDB's not done it a hell of a lot this season, then that is I think that's what he believes is their best route to goal. For me, the thing that really stood out for this one, because I've been on record for being a Valakari fan. I think that's just been the best way to put it. I like somebody coming into a bottom six team and playing attacking football. I want more managers to do it. So I want St Johnstone to stay up so that other teams will copy them, and we might end up with a very entertaining top flight quite soon. But the decision that really didn't make much sense to me was starting Aaron Essel at right back. I thought that was very strange because he's barely played since Levine left. I mean, when he played before anyway, you typically saw him in the middle of the park. I know he did play at fullback or wing back sometimes, but mainly played in the middle of the park. Not even entirely sure if he's a right back. And David Kelchins came off the bench last week against St Mirren and played well. So if you're going to mix things up, and also then just kind of moving Dre right into a centre midfielder, because if you're going to play with an actual right back, that actually moves right to play in his actual position, which is right wing. But he kept with Mackenzie Kirk there, I suppose because Kirk scored last week. Kim Pioka also scored last week. And then he's also wanting to keep Sidibe on the park. Maybe move one of them inside and put right on the wing and go with Kelchins. But to bring in Essel from essentially, it's had some fits and starts like coming off the bench, but essentially in for the cold. And yeah, that kind of really flummoxed me. And also for the second game in a row, not really use any substitutes. So I had a little bit of sympathy with the St Mirren game. I didn't think they looked in much bother at all until Ray flapped at that cross and cost them the goal. In fact, to me, it wasn't really like hanging on, and I think he maybe kept the guys on because he thought, right, okay, well, our best chance to win this game definitely is to get a third goal, and if I keep these players on, then that's the best chance of doing that. But at the same time, as you would have saw yourself when Alex Dyer was Killie manager, sometimes you do need to just make a change for the sake of it to get fresh legs on the park. And in this game, they were chasing it. He made one sub at halftime. He brought in Graham Carey. They did get better, but then he didn't do anything else until the 83rd minute, where he made another two subs. But then he's still, again, only making 3 of his 5 available subs. So I'm still very much a Valakari enthusiast, but there was a couple of things with this game that's really made me scratch my head and think, I don't really make much sense of that.
It's easy to look at the bench and go, well, I can understand why you haven't made subs because they're mostly not very good. But actually, the two guys that did come on are decent enough players. But also, I don't think he's good at all. But like Kucheravi, you talked about Josh Campbell earlier in terms of just being a guy that's just got a wee bit of energy and a wee bit of like driving. Okay, like Campbell's much more physically adept than what Kucheravi is. But if you just want someone to come on and shuttle about, like at Tynecastle, and just chase people and make a bit of a kind of game of it, like just give Hearts something to think about. Like I don't think you're in a position where those guys are are unplayable, if you know what I mean. I can understand like they've got 2 kids on the bench that like potentially they're making up the numbers and stuff, but you do have players on there who have played in the Premiership before. Again, Josh McPeak is a League One player. I do not know why they signed him, but if you just want to like stretch the game a bit, he has played as a winger. He can like just run at people. Sometimes you just need people who just do things. Like you just need someone who you can give the ball to, or even take up a position that gives the other team something to think about. I don't think Hearts can just go, that's Josh McPeak, we'll just leave him to stand there. They still need to like deal with an attacking player who's on the park.
That sounds like a decent enough defence for Josh McPeak to be.
But do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, you're right. And so there's just like little things with me, and I find it very odd that he's brought his son onto his coaching staff, and that there's not been a lot made of that. That's kind of that's like alarm bells for me as well. But maybe I'll be wrong on that. But it's like, are you telling me of all the people that you could have hired, all the tender went out for that role? You searched the net far and wide, and the best man for the job was your boy. There's question marks there, and maybe I'll be wrong on that. And like as you say, it's good for different managers to come in, and whether you can even really count Valakari as a foreign manager when he like played in Scotland, it's a bit of a different. It's like the Pittodrie situation, where it's like he's not a complete outsider to Scottish football, but guys coming in and broadening what we can look at is right, and the broadening different styles of play and all the rest of it is fine, but St Johnstone also want to stay in the Premiership, I would assume. And like the way this is going with them at the moment, I don't think the approach that has been taken over the last few weeks is the way to keep them there. Now, January may show different things, and I think we just have to wait and see what happens then. But I would be quite worried that they're kind of trending in the wrong direction at the moment. Well, I mean, they're obviously trending in the wrong direction. They've just gone bottom of the league, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas, Hearts, if we move on to them, I don't know that this win says a lot about Hearts. Like I've obviously watched the last two Hearts games fully. They were terrible against Killie, and I thought, right, that's a really bad performance. But they're going up against this bunch of joiners from Moldova in midweek. Big game, Tynecastle, no bother. And to me, they were worse against Petrocub, even though they still nearly won the game, which I think says all about the quality of opposition that they failed to beat. And they were clearly better in this game, but I think for some of the reasons we've just discussed, I don't know how much you can read into it. Now, there were some bright spots. I know that his form hadn't been amazing, but I don't understand for 1 second why Blair Spittle wasn't playing in midweek. I think you saw when he came on in midweek, just a clear improvement on the what was out there. I noticed that
Alan Forrest is what you mean.
Well, yeah, I bet, but he wasn't the only one. I mean, Alan Forrest was by far the only bad performer. Like, I noticed that Macaulay Tate, having just appeared out of nowhere for no reason for that game in midweek, had disappeared again, correctly so, because he was rubbish.
Talking about baffling decisions.
Like, just all of that. Like, I worry about Critchley. Like, I thought the appointment was weird, and I did notice someone saying that he's since he took over, Hearts are fourth in the form table.
What's wrong with Craig? What's wrong with
that says a lot about how the league's been going. But see watching, because I realised I hadn't actually seen him speak that much, and then I watched him in the pre-match before the game in midweek, and I was like, oh, you are like virgin on Cathro when you talk. And maybe it's just the interview, but I was like, you're being asked like some very softball, very easy questions by the panelists before the game, and you're somehow managing to make them sound like you're being grilled. Like, it was a really, really poor interview, and maybe his mind was in other things and all the rest of it. It's obviously he's worrying about the game more than he's worrying about talking to TNT Sports, but like, nothing that I have seen from Hearts in probably the last month has given me much cause for optimism. And I think the fact that they won a game, and they deserve to win this game, I think, despite, as you said, giving away a penalty for the fourth consecutive game with Penrice having given away the last three of them. Wilson, there's maybe something there. I don't think he should be playing the starting games at the moment. I don't think he's ready for that. But
he should be starting games within the context of this squad.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean. But in a normal Hearts squad where they are Hearts, like, he should be getting chucked on for 5 minutes here and there. But
that's a defence of Critchley, regardless of what you think he speaks like and stuff, and how much that impact has on dressing room, or whether he talks like he does to the media like he does in the dressing room. Putting that all to the side, it is just a case that it's hard, because it's hard to know, because on the one hand, this is the team that finished third last year. So you could think, well, any competent manager could come in and have them playing like the third best team in the league. But the more the season's gone on, the more you've just kind of looked at that as being like some kind of aberration. And a lot of guys, not just Shankland, because everybody's talked about Shankland, but a lot of guys playing like above their station. Like, compare this season's Kenneth Vargas to last season's Kenneth Vargas, compare George Grant, compare Alan Forrest, compare some members of the defence. Stephen Kingsley, for instance, last year compared to this season before he obviously got injured recently. Even Kai Rolls, Frankie Kent. Like, the list goes on throughout the team in terms of guys who were maybe just, whether it was Stevie Naismith's influence last year or maybe it was just the players hitting form at the right time, that there just doesn't seem to be that this campaign. And you talk about, and that's good example, Wilson.
It's James good.
Wilson,
it's good.
James Wilson should be starting for Hearts. He should be starting for Hearts at this point in time because he's clearly the second best forward in the team, and the system that seems to get the best out of the players for what they've seen this season is the one that Critchley is largely deployed, that kind of narrow 4-4-2. You need two forwards, and you especially need somebody ahead of Shankland who can move better than Shankland, and Wilson fits that a hell of a lot better than Liam Boyce does. And yeah, Vargas looked like he was maybe going to be that, but it's really not worked out at all this season. And you're just kind of waiting for January, waiting to try and improve this team. And so you're right in the sense that it's not a victory that really says an awful lot about Hearts in a positive manner. I think it's just really a case of get as many points on the board between now and January so that you're not signing players while you're looking up at literally everybody else in the league. And if they can get to the Motherwell games on the 2nd, I think, if they get past that with like 4 more points and remain in 10th, or maybe even with that move up to 9th or something, then yeah, you take that.
Yeah, and don't say Marcel Winger again.
Yeah, aye. I was told that Daniel Stendhal turned in Greg Docherty to sign him. He's literally one of the worst players I've ever seen play for Hearts. Right, I think we've talked enough about Hearts. We've talked enough about Hearts in general on this show. Right, let's go to our next game. Oh God, do we have to go to this? May as well. Ross County 1, St Mirren 2. So, this was Alex Jakoviti opening the scoring for St Mirren. The least cool player to ever do that I'm not celebrating.
I was like watching that and be like, he was doing it in such an overt way that it was like drawing more attention to himself than if he had just run about daft. It was maybe his teammates didn't exactly do him a favour, but like Alex, you've scored a tap in, like just celebrate like you've scored a tap in, and it would have been less egregious. But at least I understand that, like, because I've seen a few players doing it where it's been like, you have not really had much impact at that club. At least he was like a pretty long-serving and good player for Ross County, so I kind of understood it. But yeah, just like get a grip.
And then Michael Affetti equalised right into the second half. That's good English there, Craig. Yeah, shortly after half-time, just a few seconds, he equalised for County, but St Mirren, despite going down to 10 men after Scott Tanza was sent off, managed to win the game with Oyston Smith dispatching a very nice free kick, although questions have to be asked of Jack Hamilton, the goalkeeper, because it went in at his side, and they certainly have to be asked of him at the first goal, as he just palmed the ball out right to Jakoviti to score. I watched this game, Big.
Unlucky.
It was Megan. Absolutely. The first half in particular. I wrote down a note. It was like watching soup boiling for 45 minutes. Do you know when soup's boiling and you can see like the ingredients kind of like popping up like in the middle of the pan? It was like that, which when you're making soup is, not necessarily that unaesthetically pleasing a sight, but would you stand and watch it for 45 minutes? No, you probably wouldn't. That was what the first half was like. It was just, there was barely any pattern to play. There certainly wasn't even any for County. St Mirren were trying their hardest, but County, pretty much all game, no real pattern to their play whatsoever. The ball was just bouncing around the middle of the park, players jumping up, trying to head it in the middle of the park, ball going up in the air. It was just horrendous. The first half was a horrendous watch. Really, really bad. They couldn't get, and again, I thought this was mainly down to County. They couldn't get Hale, White, Chilvers, none of them really got into the game. They didn't, without Harmon didn't do much on the left, and he was replaced by Josh Reed, who then did even less. Affetti scored the goal, but with him replacing Brown as the right wing back, obviously he's not as good He just doesn't look like he doesn't look comfortable as a footballer.
He looks like someone who's been signed from like the 7th tier or whatever it was. Like you can see physically he's got stuff about him that probably means he's not going to be like out his depth totally, but he's not a footballer. The one thing I will say for both teams is that pitch is an absolute state. It's one of the worst pitches I've seen in the Premiership in a long time. So that will not help them. But it was not a pleasant viewing even on the highlights, I would say.
No.
It's interesting you mentioned Chilvers. I saw him standing over a free kick and I was like convinced it was Blair Spittle. He looks like Blair Spittle. I didn't realise that. And I was like, no, Blair Spittle is 2 clubs ago at Ross County. It's not him. So that was the highlight that I drew from the first half of that game anyway. But with St Mirren, I think the character in the last couple of weeks has been very impressive. First of all, coming from behind to win, albeit as I said, aided and abetted by Simo Valakari, just having all these strikers on the park, and then again with 10 men winning the game here is quite impressive. That is one of the most and I am talking with a lot of experience of brainless red cards this season at this point. Both of those yellow cards they weren't red cards, but they were both yellow cards that could have been red cards. I've never seen, or I've rarely seen such a lack of care going into a tackle when you're already booked as I did from that second one.
So you disagree with those who say it was harsh because he did look at the last second like he tried to pull out, but I think by that point it's too late.
Well, yeah, you can try and pull out, but you're still melting the guy. Like I can understand. Like I can understand the part of like it's unlucky for the player. I don't believe it in this case because I do think he'd already done too much at that point. I think you do get challenges where a player genuinely slips all the way through it. But with that one, it was like a bit like Robbie D's last week. It was like, well, he has slipped or lost balance or tried to pull out or whatever it is, but he's already committed to a really stupid challenge before that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually wondered for a second because I knew he'd been sent off, but when I was watching the highlights, I was like, oh, I wonder if he's actually going to get a straight red for this. And then you saw it back and it wasn't a straight red, it was a yellow card, but I thought it was for a really, really experienced player, a very stupid card, and his team dug him out, I would say.
Yeah, and I was quite impressed with St Mirren after they went down to 10 men. They did play a 4-4-1, which I'm not a fan of. I think teams, when they go down to 10 men, should play a 4-3-2, and basically concede the wings. But St Mirren actually kind of done this anyway, because even though they did, when they didn't have the ball, they kind of set themselves up. If County were slow in their approach, they would set themselves up in a 4-4-1. But when they did have the ball, Aduwu on one side and especially Kilty on the other played quite narrow. Kilty would almost look like a second striker at times after they had the red card, and that meant they were able to keep their attacking edge and help make the ball stick. But further than that, like, it wasn't just them. It was also like Phillips was still pushing up from midfield. Richard Taylor was getting forward with like real abandon from the left back area, and they still had, and obviously rightly so because they ended up winning the game, but they still had such belief in themselves that they were capable with 10 men of going at County and getting all 3 points. Now, County on another day could have got the win. Jordan White, fresh air swipes that shot. Even in the first half where they were terrible, they still had a couple of shooting opportunities that went just like narrowly wide. But it was just overall just such a poor game from County, and a team that, when they've lost at times this season, we've gone, oh, I can kind of see what you're doing there, or oh, that's interesting, or stuff like that. And this just lacked really anything. They were so poor after going down to 10 men, and as I said, St Mirren were quite impressive. Helped it. Bringing your Ayunga on for Mandron helped as well. He was a bit livelier. But yeah, certainly the better team, I think, won this one, even though there wasn't, it was far from a classic.
I was very amused by the volume of penalty appeals in this game. I
meant to ask, what did you think of them? The challenge on Brophy and the challenge on Phillips. I thought the challenge on Brophy looked like it should have been VAR intervening.
I don't think VAR should have intervened on any of them. I think if any of them had been given, you could have said, yeah, it's probably a penalty, but see those ones like that Brophy one. I dislike those being given as fouls because I understand why they sometimes are, but I'm like, it's kind of physical contact. It's not like, I understand that people see it as a push, and it potentially is, but it's like, I don't think VAR should be jumping in on any of those, and that's why I found it quite funny, just the number of them, and it's like, it kind of reminded me of, you remember that Chelsea-Barcelona game from years ago when like Didier Drogba at full time is running after the referee and all the rest of it,
shouting into the camera.
Yeah. It's a fucking disgrace, I think it was, but could be wrong on that. But there were very, very many penalty appeals, and you kind of assume just by the law of averages, as you like to use it, you'll maybe get one of them. But also at the same time, mostly they were just like 50-60% ones. And I felt like that with this game as well. It was like, sure, any of them on any given day could have been a penalty, but I personally didn't think any of them were such a big mistake by the referee that they should be VR'd. But maybe others will disagree with that.
Well, on the subject of referee mistakes and VAR, let's go to our next game. Motherwell 1, Kilmarnock 1. Liam Gordon opened the scoring in 70 minutes. Liam Polworth cancelled that in the second half with a shot that was undeniably a mistake from Ashton Oxborough in the Motherwell goal. But the big talking point after this one was a red card 3 minutes later to Dan Casey. Casey got into it with Danny Armstrong, kind of close to the corner flag, as Armstrong kind of baited Casey a little bit, kind of kept hold of him as well. Casey turned round, shoves him in the chest, and then moves his hand up so that it kind of comes into contact with Armstrong's neck, pushed him away. Immediately the ref who's standing beside it pulls out the red card. VAR have a look at it, tell the referee to go to the monitor. They don't think it is a red card. He has a look at it and he's like, nope, I'm perfectly happy with that. Off you go.
It was like a cursory glance. It was like, that I think that's maybe the worst decision of the season so far. Not the originally given it like fair play. You might think you've seen something, and that's, as much as we don't like VAR, like that's kind of what it's for. Where the referee has made a howler on the park, so you get him over and you say, you've got that wrong. Do you want to look again? But for the referee, with the ability to watch that back, I don't understand it. I don't understand what he thinks. Yes, like even contact with the hand on the neck or on the face still has to be beyond negligible for it to be a red card.
Mm-hmm.
I'd argue even if you want to call it a grab, it's not a grab. He touches his neck. There's no doubt about that.
It's a push.
It's a push. It is a push, and it is. Apart from people for some reason saying, "Oh, you can't raise your hands," which is, I mean, technically true that you can't do it without getting booked, but like.
It's not been like that since like the 90s. Like there was a period that was like the 90s and like the early 90s where any time you raised your hand and it came into contact with the face of an opponent, you were likely to get a red card. That was just the kind of interpretation back then. We've not had that in a while. This was like a proper like late 90s, early 90s decision.
So it does. So I was trying to work out like what's the referee's thought process here? Like, what does he think at that point he's seen? Where, I was wondering, do you think he has been influenced by the fact that, don't know who was refereeing the Hibs County game last week, was asked to go to the screen wrongly, correctly allowed the goal, and probably got praised for it, and he's went, do you know what, I'm just going to, do you know what I mean? I wonder if these things play like in your head, you know, that they've maybe been told, don't assume every time you come over that you have to go with what they tell you. But that's fine. But when you can watch a video which clearly shows a not a red card offence, then don't give a red card. As much as I can, So he is probably lucky to an extent that I don't think it massively influenced the game. If anything, I think Motherwell probably got better from that point on. It felt to me like Killie were in the ascendancy at that stage, having scored the goal. I thought Killie were the better team in the second half up to that point. Killie should have had a penalty ourselves. I felt I think that was quite clear as well, to be honest, with Brad Lyons driving into the box, and again, at full speed, I think that's almost impossible for the referee to get right, the decision, because it looks to me like Lyons. I thought Lyons is flying in, catches Halliday, fouls him in the box, and it's a free kick to Motherwell. But when you watch it back, you can clearly see Lyons gets there ahead of Halliday. Halliday stands on his foot. I don't like those penalties and we've had several of them recently, where it's like a guy just gets the ball first and the opponent stands on his foot. I don't think standing on someone's foot should be enough for a penalty, but it is. That again is talking about decisions being fortunate. I think VR should have told him to look at that. God knows what it would have done if they had. But Killie scored not that long after it anyway, so it probably had less impact on the game than it might have done had it finished 1-0. But then also subsequently Killie were kind of coming into the game. Polworth scores the goal, his first goal since pretty much 2 years ago at the same ground, which I think he just was very keen to get in the faces of the Well boys, and rightly so. And it felt like Killie were maybe kind of going on to win that game. And I felt actually the red card, like Motherwell probably got back on top after it. So the referee can probably breathe a sigh of relief that ultimately all the mistakes that were made probably didn't influence the game as much as they might have done. That a draw was probably fair for the game. It's a good point, I think, for Killie. Better point for Killie than it is for Motherwell. Both goalkeepers not covering themselves in glory with goals, I would say. I mean, Oxborough's is much more obvious in terms of being a mistake, and that the shot goes right through him, which has been quite a theme for him recently. But Kieran O'Hara, yet again, I think he makes two mistakes for that goal. I think the cross he should come for. It's really good from Miller to kind of flick it. And again, this is like Lennon Miller. He's just clearly a level above the Scottish Premiership. I think every time he just does it, it's just like, he's the one who anticipates and is like, I'm just going to fling this back into a dangerous area, where a lot of players wouldn't really have had the presence of mind to do that. O'Hara should come for that, is rooted to his line, but then it comes out and the shot goes straight through him. Robbie McCrory, I think there's been issues with his kicking, and that's been why he went off injured at half. I don't know if injured is the right phrase, but he's been struggling to kick the ball, which is an integral part of how Derek McInnes would like his goalkeepers to play. But as much as McCrory has his critics, he's clearly a better goalkeeper than O'Hara, who maybe makes the odd flashy save, but more often than not chucks goals in like that. But apart from that, like Killie, given the injury and suspension list, you've got Findlay, don't know when he's going to be back. Dee's still suspended. Matty Kennedy, we keep thinking he's going to be back, but he's still not. Given that, and I think, and given that McInnes has suddenly decided he wants to pick three strikers every week, like talking about Valakari, doing at least, like, I would say he's got a more solid base to do that, and he does kind of maybe use one of them a bit wider and stuff, but maybe just don't. But nonetheless, like the form is turning, I would say, a wee bit for Killie. It's only been one win, but that's, I think, in the last 5 games, I think it's been just one defeat, and that was that mauling at Ibrox. But especially with the fixtures, Killie have had only had 7 home games out of 18 this season. We've got 4 out of our next 5 at home. This is the spell where we've been looking at, I think, and saying, right, we need to pick up some wins now in the upcoming games. We'll see how that goes. I think that's going to be pivotal for the season, to be honest, in terms of how it goes. But they have managed to kind of keep themselves very much in touch and distance to the top 6 at this point, like only 1 win away from it. And to be honest, they're only 8 points behind Motherwell, and probably that's quite a big gap, but 8 points can go in no time if you start winning games. So we'll see how it goes from that point of view. But I think Killie need players back, and they need a wee bit more luck as well. Although they got it to an extent with that red card, but couldn't take advantage of it.
Okay, let's go to our penultimate game, which took place at Ibrox on Saturday. Rangers beating Dundee by 1-0. Vaclav Černý, the only goal in the second half, taking advantage of a strangely high Dundee defensive line. And I say that as somebody that watched the first half, where the Dundee defensive line was not high whatsoever. So I'm not entirely sure what happened there. But Craig, so many times this season we've said about Rangers, like, they've won games 1-0 and they've been absolutely turgid to watch. Fair play to them on this occasion. Didn't look like that at all. They had loads of chances. They should have won the game by much more. I think their XG ended up being like over 3.
Yeah.
And yet it was just a case of poor finishing. Egerman in particular. And they just couldn't really capitalise. But Dundee themselves never looked like doing anything to the other end.
Until the last few minutes, yeah. It reminded this game, I talked about that game where Kelly got absolutely smashed at Ibrox. This game was pretty similar, I would say. Dundee were hopeless. Rangers were quite good at picking them apart, but I think the main difference was, like, in that game, Rangers took their chances. In this one, they didn't. Even the goal they scored was probably quite a tight. It was correct, I think, but it was quite a tight offside decision. So, like, maybe in another day they somehow managed not to win this game, but they thoroughly deserved it. I think they unfortunately have left themselves a bit much to do, but I actually think, like, their form recently has been very good. They seem to have potentially, I never like to say it with Rangers, like, turned a corner a bit. Like, they seem to suddenly be clicking a little bit. They seem to be flying together. See if they can get to that, if they can keep winning through to that Old Firm game that's coming up and somehow win that game. I think the worries at Celtic will win the league, there's no doubt about that, but they will maybe start to give Celtic something to worry about, especially as we'll talk about, and maybe that was just a one-off. Like, Celtic are, to me, stuttering a wee bit.
The Celtic maybe need something to worry about.
No, exactly, yeah. They even the Champions League, which is a usual place where they get brought back down to earth, it hasn't really happened. But so I think they have turned a corner in terms of, like, we were talking, yeah, you're right, about those really, really tedious performances, and they obviously dropped quite a few points in that kind of autumn period. They've actually been winning fairly convincingly of late.
And I think it's something we've talked about before. It's what Adam Thornton talked about when he was on the podcast. Cyril Desser's not in the team. Now, it's not a case of, like, we get the whole Dessers thing, Dessers, he misses so many chances, always pish kind of thing. We actually kind of came around to Dessers, and that Dessers is a good goal scorer. Like, he does miss loads of chances, but he gets himself into positions that most strikers don't. So he can miss 2 great chances a game because he's going to get 3 and he'll score the other one. Problem with Dessers is that the way that Kilmarnock wanted to play, with his team being fairly kind of direct, is that Dessers was needed to play with his back to goal and was needed to contribute to the attack overall, and he wasn't capable of doing it. Not on a regular basis. He had these moments. He had some, like, nice wee flicks and stuff. One of the European games in particular, I think it was for one of the kind of many 3-on-1s they missed in that away game in Europe, where Dessers had an excellent kind of flick through ball. But by and large, he wasn't good enough at that position. Danilo, based on last season, was good enough, but you were kind of getting to the situation where, like, is this guy ever going to be fit? And then Egerman showed flashes but didn't really show much. Now the both of them are showing something, and they've started both of them in this game. And it was quite an interesting setup, because I looked at Y-Scout before watching the first half, and it had it as a kind of typical Rangers 4-3-3, with Egerman on the left, Hadji as a left centre midfielder, and Danilo up top. When they didn't have possession, that's kind of what it was. Not that happened too often, but when they did have possession, it was pretty much like a 4-4-2. Like, Hadji was on the left of midfield, Egerman was pushed up front alongside Danilo, had the 2 centre midfielders and Raskin kind of dropping back and Diamande going forward, and then Černý on the right. And obviously you've got Hadji and Černý, both of them like to do their business inside, but then you had Tavernier and Jefty going wide to provide the width of it. And it all did work quite well. And it worked well because they've now got forward players that they can help set their base up to. And it's kind of, and that's also kind of reverberating, I think, around the rest of the team. But it also helps that Černý put my hands up. I didn't like the look of Černý at all to start with. I thought he looked a bit of a shite bag to me, but he's not that at all, because he's in recent times been the kind of star man in games at Ibrox when the crowd's been on their back, and that takes a certain type of person to have the bravery to do that. And Hadji, I think, coming back to the team's given him a real lift as well, because he looks like he does have a bit of a new lease on life, and it's given him a bit more verve on the left hand side in recent weeks. So yeah, you're right, they are kind of clicking. There's still major issues in defence, and that's the disappointing thing from a Dundee perspective. They were playing with Robin Proper and Dujon Sterling, and you done very, very little to try and trouble them as a central defensive pairing. Just basically, first half, 5 at the back, 4 across the midfield. Seb Palmer holding within 20 yards of anybody else, knocking it long term, and he was losing it or failing to win it every time.
And the thing is, it could very easily at the end with that chance they could have scored, and it'd be like, oh yeah, they've made a masterclass, Tony Docherty, well done. But yeah, I've just got questions about Dundee that I feel like I've had since the start of last season, that like defensively they seem very wide open, and then if their attack doesn't carry the threat, like, because that was like last year a lot, and in this season as well, a lot of their wins have been when they've just been like banging in goals all over the place. If they don't do that, which it seems like some weeks they don't, they are going to lose games because they don't keep very many clean sheets. And this is not the game to judge them on, but I think like the table was starting to look a little bit more worrying for Dundee than it has been at any point recently. I think they're still 7th, so it's not like panic stations yet, but I think they are only maybe 3 or 4 points ahead of the relegation places, and they have like looked pretty poor in a number of games recently, which hasn't always been the case. Even games where they've been picking up points, they haven't always been that impressive. Whereas I think, to some extent, it was the opposite last season. There were a lot of games where they played very well, and yet didn't do it. But this time, they're a team I've got an eye on for the second half of the season, as like they need to change something, because if they don't, I think they'll get sucked down. Especially if you're looking at Hibs and maybe Hearts, like I don't know about Hearts, but like rising up the table.
Okay, let's go to our final game. This was the live match Sunday afternoon. Dundee United 0, Celtic 0. And that'll do us for this week's episode of the...
I think like there's been some pretty poor games on it. I think it's been one of the poorest games in terms of anything happening.
It says everything that the number 1 and number 2 players in the Scottish Premiership this past weekend for passes made were Stephen Welsh and Liam Scales.
Yeah, but I mean, just let them. That's the problem. Like Dundee United, Goodwin knew what he was doing. Like Goodwin has his flaws as a manager, but see if you want a team to just be able to defend, I think he's very good at that. I mean, okay, famously, that was what he said, he could fix the defence in 2 weeks or whatever it was at Aberdeen. But
yes, but the thing about Aberdeen is that Aberdeen was too big a club for Goodwin, because Goodwin felt the pull to attack. He was like, right, I can't be Aberdeen manager and set the team up like I did at St Mirren and setting the team up similar to like he is now at Dundee United. He thought I needed to attack. So the defence was shit because it didn't have the... And even he actually kind of signed. Like he signed Anthony Stewart. Anthony Stewart might have been alright if Aberdeen that season had played like Dundee United this season. Like just keep their defensive line deep and just ask it to like head the ball away. But Anthony Stewart was like one of the most limited players in the world I've ever seen in terms of passing the ball. And he was asked to pass it a lot because it's Aberdeen and the opposition sit in and Aberdeen push up to like the halfway line. But yeah, sorry, continue.
Yeah, no, so they let, like, Scales is maybe a bit better with the ball. He's improved a lot actually of late, but Stephen Welsh is only at Celtic because he's homegrown for the Champions League. There is literally, and they can be, he will happily sit on the bench and barely play any football, but they'd be there if they need him. And it's actually a bit of a shame because I actually think he has enough about him to be playing every week at a decent level.
Yeah, I think so. I think he could be, if he went to, especially like this level, he could easily go to another team in the Scottish Premiership and play most weeks.
Yeah, I think so. And for whatever reason, you can hardly blame the guy. He's making a lot of money. I'm sure his pay packet is much more that than if he played for any other team in the Scottish Premiership. And he's probably made 100 appearances for Celtic. Do you know what I mean? And he may be the next Tony Ralston, that he just kind of eventually somehow something happens and he ends up playing for Scotland and all the rest of it. 68 appearances for Celtic. He's getting there, but he is not the most talented on the ball. Like, and neither, and then you look across the back four, and neither is Ralston. So that back four was a bit more limited than you would normally get. Like, you see, like Ralston has some qualities, but like in terms of like his work rate and all the rest of it, defensively he's actually all right. Like, but he's not Alistair Johnston. And so you're looking at that team and all of a sudden it's very, very workmanlike rather than what you normally get. The midfield, again, should be better, should have been doing more than it did in this game. It just felt like Celtic they obviously had a bit of a flu outbreak and it left them missing a few players, but that Celtic team on paper, regardless of what's there in the defence, should have been more than enough to go and win the game. It should have been more than enough to go and create some chances, which they barely seem to do. And yet I think Goodwin deserves a lot of credit for that, and like that's points against Rangers and Celtic this season, which is good, and it suggests a lot about how they set up. And I thought they were actually very unlucky to lose the home game against Rangers earlier in the season as well. There was a spell where they looked like they were going to get absolutely battered. They sorted that out, and then they could easily have taken something. So he has been able to. I think they will probably not be able to sustain exactly where they are in the table, but as a newly promoted team, to come up and very comfortably stay up, I think is, even if you are Dundee United, is quite impressive. Very few do it. Very few, apart from like your Hearts and Hibs size clubs, do it. And Dundee United are obviously still a wee rung below that. So they've been impressive. They have been continuing to pick young players as well. So you had Miller Thompson and he's not that he's actually that young anymore, but Kai Fotheringham in the team. So they are continuing to do that. They're bringing in players. They are getting a lot out of, I would say, a somewhat limited squad. They do have some good players, but they are not. They've not got like standout, amazing, talented players, I would say, but they're getting a lot out of them. So I think all of the credit goes to Goodwin in this game. For Celtic, it's kind of like a game that you'll probably forget about. It's like if they have their title DVD, not that you have DVDs anymore, but if you had their title DVD at the end of the season, it would be like in December, Celtic would, after the League Cup win, Celtic went to Tannadice and drew 0-0 on to the next game.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's like it probably makes no difference to them in the context of the season, unless the next couple of games go badly, and then it's like, oh, that was the moment where it all started. but more than likely, I don't even know who they're playing next, but they will probably win 5-0 and we'll all forget about it.
Yeah, I was going to look it up, but it doesn't matter. Yeah, probably who they're winning.
Whoever they're playing. Whoever they're playing. Yeah. At this point...
oh, wait, hang on. Is it Rangers?
It's surely not Boxing Day, is it? It'll be a Motherwell at home, so yeah, 5-0.
Motherwell at home. So Rangers is the second. Oh yeah, so
Yeah.
they get to keep their January one, but Hibs and Hearts have to play on fucking Boxing Day. Fuck off. No happy.
I was disappointed about that as well, because I'm going to the Killer game on Boxing Day, so I hate having to try and watch the game on the train, which is probably what I'll be doing.
I think after whatever Hearts and Hibs serve up, they'll be doing you a big favour by you missing that.
That's true. But I do still like watching them.
Right, Craig, I think that'll do us. Thank you very much for joining me.
No, you're very welcome.
And thank you to everybody for listening. If you would like to hear more, then the best way to do that is to join the Patreon. Patreon.com/Terrace Podcast, where you will find hours upon hours of bonus content. And the recent stuff going up is that we've started again our 16-1 quiz tournament, where 16 Terrace podcast contributors go head to head to find an ultimate winner. We didn't do it last season, but did do it the season before. I am the reigning champion, and we're going to see if I will keep my crown. We've yet to get to my match so far. We've only put up one of the podcast, but there'll be another one going up this week, and there'll be another couple. So if you like your quiz episodes, then that is a good reason to subscribe to the Patreon. Once more, that is patreon.com/Terrace Podcast. Thank you, everybody. We'll talk to you again very soon. Goodbye.